So I want to turn and talk about the kinds of corruption that we're seeing in front of us. I think I called it election skullduggery summary. And the reason I want to do that in part is because I don't think there is, it isn't just one particular thing, like you could point to one particular district and say, oh, well, I see what happened. You see in a congressional district X in this state, this happened. It's not just that little things happen in states around the country, although they did. Many, many bad things happen in states around the country. But the larger picture is there's a massive, legitimate concern about what the means the left used to tabulate votes and to flip votes in the early voting, the computers that contain the data from the early voting, the actual manipulation of computer-held data that recorded the early votes. Now, I will tell you, if you are big into following politics, you probably saw the interview by Sidney Powell. She was on Lou Dobbs along with Tom Fitton, and then she was on again, I think yesterday, with Maria Bartiromo. So Sidney Powell who is, that name, of course, she's the woman who represents Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. She's one of the premier lawyers in the country, widely regarded, a brilliant lawyer, a former prosecutor, a brilliant writer, researcher, thinker. She is an award-winning author. She's a best-selling author of 2 books. But the real thing is, she's a legal mind way above most legal minds. She went on Lou Dobbs and said essentially and she's now working directly, Sidney Powell, directly with the White House team on uncovering the fraud that we watched in this election cycle, the fraud that's right in front of our faces. She is, I don't know if she's leading the charge, but she's a central attorney working for Trump in challenging this election fraud. She made a statement, and she made it on Lou Dobbs. And first, I can just tell you what it was. I'm not going to play it, and I'll tell you in a moment why I'm not going to play it. She said, there has been a massive and coordinated attempt to steal this election from we, the people of the United States of America, to delegitimize votes for Donald Trump and to manufacture votes for Joe Biden. They have done it every way imaginable, having dead people vote in great numbers, to fraudulently manipulating data inside the voting tabulation software. And this is the same thing. If you're sounding familiar to you, if you listen to my show all the time, in fact, you can go back and you can find an interview I did with a gentleman who's based in Dallas, actually, named Russ Ramsland. Russ Ramsland, his organization, ASOG, Allied Security Operations Group, has these massive guru experts diving in, and as far back as 2018 and even before that, they were able to show that a person who was determined to manipulate election data, and what I mean by that is people who vote early, so you vote early in many states, the data is held in a computer, and for reasons of not wanting to sway or manipulate the election, that data is kept secret. We never know how the early vote came out until election day. So you have early vote, usually have a period of time between the end of early vote and election day, and in that time period, the data is stored somewhere. What Russ Ramsland has been able to prove, his organization has proved, I've seen the lengthy demonstration of it. We've had him on this show 2 or 3 times. You can go back and listen to those interviews. They've been able to show not just that it is completely possible to hack in to the data, to computers where the data is held, the data are stored that tell you how many votes, in this example, Biden versus Trump got, but it's also possible to manipulate it, to shift 3% of the votes, or whatever percent you pick, 3% of votes from one to another. And he says it's possible to do so without leaving a trace, almost impossible to uncover what has been done. And you don't have to be a guru cyber security. You don't have to be a rock star guy. A person with an average amount of intelligence, average amount of knowledge of how to hack into computers could do this. He showed in many of the demonstrations, Russ Ramsland, how this occurred in 2018. And what Sidney Powell said. Now they're giving that background. I know Sidney has heard Russ Ramsden's presentation many times. She knows the whole story. She said on Lou Dobbs, she said again on Maria Bartiromo that it is clear. She didn't say maybe. She didn't say might have. She said data were manipulated that were put in from early voting. Data was flipped from a vote for Trump to a support for Biden, a vote for Biden. And she's setting out to do the litigation, to make that presentation to courts in this country, to point out this is one way in which there has been cheating in this election cycle. Her exact words were, they use an algorithm to calculate the votes they need to flip. So they look at how many votes, that how far Trump is ahead. They use an algorithm to calculate the number of votes they need to flip, and they use computers to flip votes from Trump to Biden. And if this were some goofball hanging out in a street corner saying this to you, saying this, I wouldn't be telling you about it. This is not someone who would randomly, casually make such an enormously consequential and serious allegation. This is Sidney Powell. This is Sidney Powell, premier, top-tier lawyer in the country, well-known, well-trusted, and she's telling America this is what they did. And she's part of the team, the Trump team, putting it out there. Now, that Lou Dobbs little segment that I mentioned, that was on, I don't know what day, Friday or Saturday. So I grabbed that because I thought it was so significant, and I put it up on our Facebook page, America Can We Talk Facebook page. It was not, okay, it was Saturday for sure. It was not up 1 hour when Facebook took it down. They didn't take it down. They do one of their, this has been fact-checked by independent fact checkers. This is inaccurate. This is not true. And they block your access to hearing it. So you can't hear it. Now, I'll tell you folks, I don't want to get any more, so I don't have it back up on YouTube because they keep taking things down like this. But if you go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, you will be able to see later today a link to Sidney Powell saying exactly what I just told you. They had to put this interview with Maria Bartiromo on BitChute. That is one of the new social media platforms that does not censor people. BitChute is BITCHUTE. You can hear her there. So this information from Sidney Powell, she goes on to point out not just that they did this, the Trump-Biden race, she also said she thinks Doug Collins, who is running for Senate, a favorite of conservatives, Doug Collins had his race stolen from him, and John James had his race stolen from him. So two other Republicans who would now be in the U.S. Senate, and she's saying are not there because of this actual, fraudulent isn't even strong enough a word, blatantly dishonest flipping of votes inside the computer software that's holding the data about voting. So that's what Sidney Powell is saying, is one category of this. I'm talking about how important it is for us to be on top of what the left is doing in this election cycle. What she's saying is monumental. She is part of the team filing lawsuits. We'll see what happens this week, how much of that comes out. But you can actually watch, if you go back to the first time I had Russ Ramsden on my show, which is a while ago now, but we actually played the video that his team came up with that showed you could actually see the internal software measurement at certain numbers, and then at some certain point it just flips. I mean, he's actually been able to show that. This was actually in a race, I think in Kentucky, the governor's race in Kentucky, I think. Point is, this is not some little, hothead person who's trying to think of every possible way the left could be cheating. This is Sidney Powell who's seen the evidence, and that's what she's saying happened. That's the number one way the Democrats tried to steal this election from President Trump. Second point is that 6,000 vote glitch. I think that you've all probably read about it by now. It was in Michigan, in Antrim County, Michigan or Pennsylvania, I think Michigan. But anyway, where they could show that the computer program, the software in Antrim County, the software called Dominion, flipped 6,000 votes from Trump to Biden. Fortunately, the people caught it and said, oh, hey, sorry about that, let us flip it back. But that same software, Dominion software, is used in most of the counties in Michigan and in all the swing states. And so, at the very least, every single place where this software has been used needs to be subject to a manual recount of votes. A manual recount, and if they don't have a paper trail, we're in a world of hurt, my friends, a world of hurt, if they cannot produce any way to do a recount. What Sidney Powell's calling for, she used this term, we need an audit. She said, we have to fight tooth and nail in federal court to expose fraud, and she actually calls it, and she, as I say, she chooses her words carefully. She doesn't just spew. She's a very careful speaker. Fight tooth and nail in federal court, says Sidney Powell, to expose fraud and the conspiracy behind it, and get a recount and audits in most of the country. In most of the country. So we had that little episode going on. We had the 6,000 vote glitch, which was the Dominion software. So every place using that software ought to be re-examined, a full audit done. We have, as Sidney Powell, we were just talking about the flipping, the electronic manipulation of vote totals, switching 3% of votes. We have violation of the laws relating to mail-in ballots on a massive, massive, massive scale. I mentioned it last week, but the Constitution provides that the state legislatures, the people you vote to be your state senators and state house members, they make state law, they make the law about what the rules are about balloting, how long early voting is, when's the last day to register to vote, all sorts of rules like that. Every state has their own rules, so you have to know in the state you live in what the rules are. But you have in the Constitution the clear authority given only to the legislature. And yet, in this election cycle, when the left was so hysterically driven to get rid of Trump for any reason, to get in, Bozo the clown if they had to, anyone, just get Trump out of there, you had changes made by entities and individuals who are not state legislators, not the legislature meeting in session to pass a new law, but individuals saying, hey, in light of COVID, we're going to push off the deadline to send in your mail-in ballot. We're going to push off the postmark deadline. We're going to push off the date by which we have to receive. They just ignored state law and made up their own rules. Fortunately, in that particular arena, you've already had Justice Alito, Supreme Court Justice Alito, issue an order, I think in 2 states. I know it's been in 2 states. I don't know if he was the author of both orders, but he was definitely the author of one where he said he ordered the state to segregate the mail-in ballots that arrived by 8 p.m. on Election Day and the mail-in ballots that came in afterwards, because these states have been deciding without the support of law behind them how far past Election Day they'll accept ballots and count them in the vote tally. And if you didn't know this, I'm really clear about something. The reason these things are important is this. If you have mail-in ballots, and it's very different, by the way, absentee ballots are very different. Absentee ballot is if I knew I couldn't go in and vote on Election Day for whatever reason, and I sent a request to my election department, I said, I want to vote early, I want to vote by paper this year, please give me an absentee ballot, and they send me one, and I get it home, I fill it out, and mail it back in, that's an absentee ballot. I asked for it, I filled it out, I returned it. Mail-in ballots, the problem why it's been so extremely alarming to people is that the mail-in ballots were sent out unsolicited, sent out to millions of people who didn't ask for them, and they're floating out there, and whoever knows what happens to them in the U.S. Mail Service and who gets a hold of them, and it's very, very difficult to figure out whether someone voted twice, who voted the mail-in ballot being sent back to you. And so these are kind of the big pockets of serious, serious reasons to demand close inspection of this election cycle. The 3% of vote flipping is going to be electronically is going to be something that a court's going to have to look at. Experts are going to have to explain, lay it out for the court to see how much happened like that. That's a huge thing. The mail-in ballot thing is just going to be an effort to determine whether or not the state sufficiently segregated mail-in ballots submitted in a timely manner versus late mail-in ballots. So the mail-in ballot is a whole other source of massive potential fraud in this country. And I want to tell you one other thing that's happening. there are, of course, now people on the ground, lawyers on the ground for Trump, volunteers all over the country, looking at the voting turnout, saying, how could this be that it was all for Trump? Everything's going great. He's clearly going to win an election night. You wake up the next day and, hey, lo and behold, Biden won everything, pretty much everything, all the swing states. And there's a lot of inspection closely to what has actually happened. One thing I happen to know happened was in some states, the people reviewing the voting data are realizing that there was an inordinately high, meaning massively higher than possibly comprehensible, massively higher than anything that would be consistent with past voting behavior of people who register to vote. And in some states, you have to remember, when you go to get your driver's license, they automatically register you to vote. So you didn't even really try to register. You maybe not even cared if you registered. They have people who registered when they got their driver's license or some other automatic way, who never vote, have no voting history. Maybe they got their voter registration years ago. No voting history, but they're still there in the books. And then you have, lo and behold, a lot of these longtime registered never voters showing up as having voted on Election Day. Now, I know defenders of the left, defenders of Biden, people who say there's no such thing as vote fraud, will say, well, you know, this is a really unusual election. A lot of people fired up. A lot of people probably didn't ever vote because they didn't really care. But this time, they're either fired up because they love Trump, fired up because they love Biden. No one's fired because they love Biden. People are fired up because they love Trump, maybe fired up because they don't like Trump and they want to vote against him. So maybe that explains some of that. It does not explain the numbers. There are many, many mathematical, statistical experts who are pointing out that many serious, egregious things in this election cycle make no sense statistically, make no sense mathematically. I'll tell you one that doesn't make sense even logically. So everyone, the House, Nancy Pelosi, was bragging before the election about how she was going to, man, this is going to be the Democrats' election. They're just going to take this. They're so ready to roll. You know, they're going to take over the country. They were wound up as all get out. Well, as it turns out, the U.S. House, if you want to just understand how extreme this was, support for the Republicans was in this election cycle, Republicans defeated at least 7 Democrat House incumbents, including one longtime committee chair. The GOP stands to gain 15 House seats. Pelosi had been saying that the Democrats were going to gain seats, that people hate Trump so much because she hates Trump so much. She figured she could tell the American people, oh yeah, we're going to have a huge growth in the Democrat majority in the House. What happened instead? Republicans defeated at least 7 Democrat House incumbents. If remaining ballots fall their way, the GOP gains as many as 15 seats. And here's the final thing. Democrats, on the other hand, failed to defeat a single GOP incumbent. Please process that. You tell me that in America, and House races are a great example, a great barometer, because every person in the country had the opportunity to vote in a U.S. House race, because every member of the House is up every 2 years. Every member of the House has to go back before the voters every 2 years. And this election cycle, where Pelosi's trying to claim that, you know, the Democrats are going to sweep it, where the Democrat media mob, the mainstream media, is trying to claim that Biden won the popular vote, Biden won all these swing states, Biden won all this stuff, and yet not one Democrat could defeat one incumbent Republican House member. These two things do not compute. Both cannot be true. And everyone knows this. Now, I understand mathematically that could be true, but in common sense, here in the world of reality and common sense, that could not be true, and everyone knows it. And everyone knows it. There were a lot of funny comments about it. Pelosi's been out talking about how she wants to run again to be the Speaker of the House, and a lot of people saying, you kind of cooked your goose. You promised a big Democrat surge, and honestly, the Democrats barely held on to the House. So But in this segment, we're trying to talk about in this segment, and I know I have so much going on here today, but we're trying to talk about this idea about, election fraud, and is there really evidence of it, and what is it, and, election skullduggery. So you have the 3% vote flipping electronically that is been described already by Sidney Powell. You have the glitch, and by the way, glitch is such an intensely manipulative word. Glitch is kind of like a typo. Oops, I goofed. I typed a typo. A glitch is a little tiny mistake. Computer programs don't think. Computer programs don't reason. They don't make typos like people make typos. When you have a glitch and it flips 6,000 votes from Trump to Biden, and there was another race in Pennsylvania, same thing. It announced a Democrat as the winner, and then actually when the glitch got fixed, turns out the Republican won. And another thing, you talk about just statistical impossibilities. Why is every mistake we're uncovering, every new batch of surprise ballots, who knew? Here's a bunch of new mail-in ballots. All the glitches they discover, all the mistakes they discover, they always trend to boosting Biden's vote count and taking votes away from Trump. This is not naturally, humanly possible, and everybody knows it. So I wanted to, the other source of election fraud, we have people looking into whether people voted for other people's ballots, massive numbers of dead people voting. I had data about all the people who had to have been born, I think it was like before 1896 in order to have voted, but it seemed like, yeah, that probably happened. No, it was right before 1900. So people would be 120 years old, but they showed up as having voted. Now, I understand there's a default in some software. If you don't fill in your date of birth correctly, it'll default to some number. They say, oh yeah, it always defaults to January 1, 1900. Well, I'm sorry, there were a lot of way past octogenarians who voted in this last election cycle, and that is very close scrutiny because it probably didn't really happen.